Scotland. As you can see down here, James, by the grace of God, meaning the Heavenly Father, Yahweh, which is his name. His son's name is Yahushai. King of England, Scotland, France, and Ireland. Now I'll show you why I say this is a great man, and he should be honored for the work that he did. This is from a website called JesusIsLord.com. I'm going to read a citation or an excerpt from that website. It says, the complete translator's notes of the authorized King James scholars are not included in today's publishing. So the scholars that got together that helped King James bring the Bible from the original Hebrew into the King's English, they actually had notes that they, side notes that they wrote about their ordeal in translating the word. And from the research that I found, I guess it was a pretty heavy ordeal, because in those days, you know, the kings control all forms of information, and the common people, a lot of them were left in the dark, because that was a means of control. So King James, what he wanted to do was translate the word of the Heavenly Father to the common man, so the common man could enjoy the word of the Heavenly Father just like the elites were enjoying it. So that's why, one of the reasons why I say he was a great man. King James was a man of the people. Alright, it says, the complete translator notes of the authorized King James scholars are not included in today's publishings. This is unfortunate because these notes say a lot about these men. They were humble. Now these men it's talking about is the scholars that got together when the job of translating the Bible from the original Hebrew started. It was, I believe it was 54 scholars, and then it dwindled down to 47, because some of those scholars that were helping James in his work, some of them were being killed, man, for helping James translate the Bible, King James. It says they were humble, loved the word of the Heavenly Father, loved the king, were berated by the Catholic religion. And at that time, the Catholic religion, the main heads at that time was our people, so-called Negroes, wicked so-called Negroes. And then later Esau totally took it over, which is why you see him in the so-called Vatican today. But at one time, the popes that control that was so-called Negroes, black men. So even in James' day, they were berated by the Catholic religion for translating the Bible. And they desired a translation for the common man who was kept in darkness. Some of the translators were killed for their faith. This book, meaning the KJV version, the King James version of 1611, was forged in blood, sweat, and tears. So this was a noble effort, and some of those scholars paid with their lives for that noble effort. That's why we can't just look at the King James version today and just take this thing lightly. This is a serious work, man. This is a solemn work. Reading on, it says, I've heard folks make a big to-do about the italics in the authorized KJV, the King James version. While unlike many of today's translators, the authorized KJV translators let us know which words they had to add in translating in order to give the full meaning of the original text. So when they were translating, they had to have or add certain English words to convey, or to try to convey, the pure meaning of what was written in the Hebrew, which shows you just how powerful the Hebrew is. And you got so-called brothers that brush the Hebrew aside, Nate Satan in particular. And I'll show you something on that. Not on Nate Satan, but on the original Hebrew. It says these are the words in italics in the KJV. So in other words, they had to put in the KJV, certain words were put in italics because they were showing you where they had to add certain words. They weren't adding on it to distort the meaning. They were adding on it to to try their best to convey what was said in the original text, in the Hebrew text. It says other translators have added words too, but they don't tell you what they have added. I speak a little Spanish and know that it is oftentimes necessary to rearrange or add words so that the translation makes sense. So the person who put this together said, look, even in Spanish, when you translate it from Spanish to English, you have to add certain words to get, so the person who understands English can get a better meaning of what you said in Spanish. It says these men, going back to the translators of King James, these men went through the extra trouble of identifying which words they added. That's real scholarship and integrity, and I agree. So the scholars that worked with King James, they even went through the extra trouble of identifying through italics what words they added in the KJV to try their best to convey what was said in the original Hebrew. So that's how you know that wasn't so-called white men that did that job. That was so-called black men. That was Israelite men that had integrity that did the work. Because the so-called white man, he doesn't have no goddamn integrity. Alright? Now, I mentioned about the Hebrew. This is a still that I took from my old Apocrypha. And it's pretty old. It's beaten up. But anyway, I want to convey a point here. And you've heard us bring this out. You know, Elder Tahar, Elder Ramlob, all the brothers, time and time we've read this little excerpt. This is from the Wisdom of Jesus, the son of Sirach, Ecclesiasticus, just to show you just how important the Hebrew is. Now, it's written right here. Let me blow it up so you can see it. It says, for the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue, which that was the job of the translators who worked with King James, have not the same force in them. So what does that tell you? That's telling you that Hebrew has a powerful force. But then you got so-called brothers that push away the Hebrew. Another thing too, how can you call yourself a Hebrew Israelite if you don't know no Hebrew? And that's why the spirit of Yahweh Bashim Yahushai is coming upon Elder Tahar and Elder Ramlab, especially Elder Ramlab. He's been dealing with that Hebrew for the longest. Alright, he has which you'll see, he has channels devoted exclusively to the Hebrew. Because the Hebrew is a powerful language, man. When I first came into knowledge years ago, there were Hebrew classes. And Hebrew was taught. So we're going back to that. And that, pursuant to Zephaniah 3 and 9, how can Zephaniah 3 and 9 be fulfilled if we don't teach the Hebrew? Did not the Lord say, every word that come out of his mouth shall be fulfilled? Is that not written? Anyway, reading on, it says, for the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And not only these things, but the law itself and the prophets and the rest of the books have no small difference when they are spoken in their own language. So that's why King James, the scholars that worked with him, had to write things in italics to show that they had to add certain words, because there was, in English, there wasn't no word that could cover what was said in Hebrew, so they had to add certain things, showing you again how powerful the Hebrew language is. And that's why I read this excerpt, to give you an idea the power of the Hebrew language. And when I say Hebrew language, I'm talking about Lashon Kodash, which in Hebrew means the holy tongue. Alright? Now, this is from a website entitled English Bible History, since we're speaking about Apocrypha, and I want to show you how the Apocrypha was taken out of the Bible because of its the content, you know. It says, while Noah Webster, just a few years after producing his famous dictionary of the English language. Now, as far as I know, Noah Webster is nothing but a damn devil, a damn cracker, a damn Edomite, right? Who produced his own modern translation of the English Bible in 1833, and it's really in the 1800s when all this changing of the Bible came about. You know, you had the learned elders of Zion. They came on the scene around 1880. When I say came on the scene, meaning they came on the scene trying to, with that huge project of changing the Bible around 1880. Anyway, it says English Bible in 1833, the public remained too loyal. Let me read this again. While Noah Webster, just a few years after producing his famous dictionary of the English language, you all know about the Webster's Dictionary, would produce his own modern translation of the English Bible in 1833, which that I didn't know. I didn't know that he tried to produce his own English Bible. The public remained too loyal to the King James Version for Webster's version to have much impact. Now, the only reason Webster would try to produce his own translation of the Bible is to change it. I mean, everybody was happy with the King James Version. Why he had to come along and try to put his own version? Because they had distortment in there. That's why. Because he's a goddamn devil. And that's called extrapolation. What I just said is called extrapolation, which a lot of so-called brothers don't know how to do. Anyway, reading on, it says, it was not really until 1880s that England's own planned replacement for their King James Bible. Now, why they have to replace it? Everybody was happy with it. They had an ulterior motive. That England's own planned replacement for their King James Bible, the English Revised Version, would become the first English language Bible to gain popular acceptance as a post-King James Version and modern English Bible. The widespread popularity of this modern English translation brought with it another curious characteristic. The absence of the 14 apocryphal books. So now we find out why he had to create his new version. Because he took out the books of the Apocrypha. That's why. Reading on, it says, up until the 1880s, every Protestant Bible, now remember I mentioned about the 1880s, right? You had the learned elders of Zion. Anyway, up until the 1880s, every Protestant Bible, not just Catholic Bibles, had 80 books, not 66, which 66 plus 14 equals 80. So that's about right. It says the intestamental books were written of hundreds of years before Christ called the Apocrypha. Before Christ called the Apocrypha, were part of virtually every printing of the Tyndale Matthews Bible, the Great Bible, the Bishop's Bible, the Protestant Geneva Bible, and the King James Bible, until their removal in 1880. So what this is basically saying is the Apocrypha was on all these Bibles, but around the 1880s, which I mentioned about the learned elders of Zion, the Apocrypha was removed out of the Bible. The original 1611 King James contained the Apocrypha, and that's true to this day. There's old versions of the King James with the Apocrypha in it, which, you know, in the islands, particularly in Jamaica, they call it the Maccabees Bible. The original 1611 King James contained the Apocrypha, and King James threatened anyone who dared to print the Bible without the Apocrypha with heavy fines and a year in jail. So King James was alright, man. He was a Jake. He was an Israelite. He had integrity. He said, look, if any of you clowns print another Bible and you don't have the Apocrypha in it, not only am I going to give you a heavy fine, I'm going to put you in jail for a year. Again, something the so-called white man wouldn't do, because he ain't got no integrity. Only for the last 120 years has the Protestant Church rejected these books and removed them from their Bibles. So You know, in the last 120 years,